Hi, welcome back to Soft Static Files. Get comfortable, get a drink or maybe a snack, and get ready, because this one gets strange. November 24th, 1971. The day before Thanksgiving, at Portland International Airport, a man walked up to the Northwest Orient ticket counter and purchased a one-way ticket to Seattle. He paid in cash. The name on the ticket was Dan Cooper. He carried no luggage. No one paid much attention to him. He looked like any other businessman traveling home before the holiday. Less than 5 hours later, the same man had hijacked a commercial airliner, collected $200,000 in cash, forced the aircraft back into the sky, and disappeared into the darkness with a parachute strapped to his back. More than 50 years later, the FBI still cannot say who he was, or whether he survived the jump at all. This is the only unsolved skyjacking in American history. The flight was Northwest Orient Flight 305, a short trip from Portland, Oregon, to Seattle, Washington. Only 36 passengers were on board. Nothing about the flight seemed unusual. The man who called himself Dan Cooper appeared to be in his mid-40s, around 6 feet tall, approximately 180 pounds. He wore a dark business suit, a white dress shirt, a thin black tie secured with a mother-of-pearl tie clip, black loafers, and a dark raincoat. Before boarding, he purchased a bourbon and soda. He smoked Raleigh cigarettes while waiting for departure, and if I have pronounced it incorrectly, I'm sorry, because I don't know all cigarettes, and I don't know how to pronounce all of them, so it might be wrong. Let's continue. Something that was perfectly ordinary in 1971. Witnesses later described him as calm, polite, soft-spoken. He never raised his voice. He never appeared nervous. If you had walked past him in the terminal that afternoon, you probably wouldn't have looked twice. He looked exactly like the kind of man airports were built for. A businessman, a commuter, someone with somewhere to be. At 2:50 p.m., Flight 305 took off from Portland. The flight to Seattle was expected to last less than 30 minutes. No one on board, including the crew, had any reason to believe that they were about to become part of one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in aviation history. Shortly after takeoff, Dan Cooper signaled for one of the flight attendants. Her name was Florence Schaffner. She walked over, expecting nothing more than another drink order. Instead, Cooper handed her a folded piece of paper. She slipped it into her purse without reading it. At the time, this wasn't unusual. Businessmen occasionally handed phone numbers to flight attendants. She assumed that's exactly what it was. Cooper leaned slightly toward her. Then, in a calm voice, he said, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Schaffner unfolded the paper. The message was brief, direct. There was no attempt to sound dramatic. No threats written in capital letters. No unnecessary words, only one sentence mattered. "I have a bomb in my briefcase." Cooper asked her to sit beside him. She did. Without raising his voice, he unclipped his black briefcase and lifted the lid just enough for her to look inside. She later described seeing several red cylinders, connected by insulated wires, attached to what appeared to be a large battery. Whether it was a real bomb or an elaborate fake has never been confirmed, But in that moment, there was no reason to doubt him. Cooper looked at her and quietly began listing his demands. He wanted $200,000 in cash, $20 bills, 4 parachutes, 2 main parachutes, 2 reserve parachutes, and a fuel truck waiting in Seattle the moment the aircraft landed. The instructions were precise. The money and parachutes were to be delivered before anyone left the plane. No tricks, no delays, no unnecessary conversation. Schaffner carried the message to the cockpit. Within minutes, the pilots contacted air traffic control. The hijacking was real. The information moved quickly from controllers to airline officials to the FBI. Meanwhile, inside the cabin, almost nothing changed. The passengers had no idea about what was happening. Some continued reading newspapers, others stared out the windows, a few ordered another drink. The aircraft circled in the air while authorities rushed to gather the ransom. And through it all, Dan Cooper remained remarkably calm. He lit another cigarette, finished his bourbon, spoke politely to the crew. He never shouted, never waved a weapon, never panicked. The longer the situation continued, the stranger it became. This wasn't the behavior of someone acting on impulse. It felt planned, meticulous, almost routine. As Flight 301 continued circling about the Pacific Northwest, officials on the ground raced to meet Cooper's demands. The FBI began collecting $200,000 in cash, nearly 10,000 $20 bills. Every single bill was photographed. Every serial number was carefully recorded. If the money ever resurfaced, they wanted to know exactly where it had been. At the same time, authorities gathered the 4 parachutes from nearby skydiving schools. The decision wasn't accidental. Investigators believed that if they supplied only 1 military parachutes, Cooper might suspect they had been sabotaged. Providing civilian equipment made the ransom appear genuine. Back inside the cabin, the passengers still knew very little. The crew told them their arrival in Seattle would be delayed because of a minor mechanical issue. Most believed it. Some looked at the windows, wondering why the aircraft seemed to be flying in circles. That's weird, isn't it? And others simply waited. When Flight 305 finally touched down in Seattle, it had been in the air for nearly 2 hours. The aircraft taxied to a remote section of the airport, far away from the terminal, far away from the public. The lights inside the cabin were dimmed. Curtains remained closed. Outside, FBI agents, local police, airline officials, and journalists waited in silence. No one knew how the next few minutes would end. A single airline employee approached the aircraft. He carried the money, the parachutes, and nothing else. Following Cooper's instructions, everything was loaded onto the airplane. Only then did Cooper allow the passengers to leave. One by one, all 36 passengers stepped safely onto the runway. None of them had been injured. Most had no idea how close they had come to disaster. Several crew members were also released, but Cooper wasn't finished. He ordered the pilots, a flight engineer and flight attendant, Tina Mucklow, to remain on board. Their next destination was Mexico City. Before departure, the aircraft was refueled. During the stop, Cooper refused food. He refused medical assistance. He refused to negotiate. His demands hadn't changed. He simply waited, watching quietly, as if he already knew exactly how the night would end. Just after 7:40 p.m., Flight 305 lifted off once again. This time, there were only 5 people on board, 4 crew members and 1 hijacker. Before takeoff, Cooper gave the pilots a series of unusual instructions. He wanted the aircraft to fly low, no higher than 10,000 feet. He requested the landing gear remain partially deployed, the wing flaps set at 15 degrees, and the speed kept as low as safely possible. The pilots immediately recognized that these were not random requests. Someone familiar with airplanes could have known exactly why those settings mattered. The Boeing 727 had one feature unlike almost any commercial aircraft flying at the time: a rear staircase that could be lowered during flight. It was designed for remote airports, where passengers sometimes boarded from the back. To most people, it was just another part of the airplane. To Dan Cooper, it may have been the entire plan from the very beginning. Shortly after takeoff, Cooper instructed flight attendant Tina McLaughlin to come to the rear of the aircraft. Unlike Florence Schaffner, Tina would spend much longer with him. She later described him as calm, respectful, even considerate. At one point, he thanked her for her help. There was no shouting, no visible panic, no violence, only quiet instructions. As the aircraft continued south, Cooper began preparing the parachutes. He tied the canvas money bag securely around his waist. He examined the equipment carefully. At approximately 8 p.m., he told Tina to go forward to the cockpit. She hesitated. He repeated the order. Moments later, she walked away. It would be the last time anyone would ever see him. Inside the cockpit, the crew remained focused on flying the aircraft. Then they noticed something unusual. A warning light illuminated. The rear air stair had been activated. The aircraft suddenly pitched upward as if its balance had changed. A few minutes later, the pilots felt a sharp movement. Something or someone had left the airplane. Outside, the conditions were brutal. It was a cold November night. Heavy rain, strong winds, almost no visibility. The aircraft was flying at roughly 10,000 feet over dense forests near the Washington state border. Below, there were mountains, rivers, and miles of wilderness. If Cooper had jumped, he had chosen one of the most unforgiving places imaginable. And yet, he did jump, or at least, everything suggested that he did. No one saw him leave, no one watched him land, no one ever recovered the parachutes or his body. He simply vanished. Within hours, the largest manhunt in FBI history at the time was underway. Agents searched the forest from the air. Helicopters flew over the suspected drop zone. Military aircraft joined the operation. Ground teams combed through miles of rugged terrain. They searched riverbanks, mountain trails, logging roads. Nothing. No footprints, no torn parachute, no briefcase, no clothing, nobody. The search continued for weeks, then months, then years. Every lead was investigated. Hundreds of suspects were interviewed. The FBI followed anonymous letters, telephone calls, and reported sightings from across the country. None of them solved the mystery. It was as if the night had swallowed him whole. Then, nearly 9 years later, the case took an unexpected turn. On February 10, 1980, an 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram was vacationing with his family along the Columbia River. While digging in the sand, he uncovered several decaying bundles of $20 bills. The money was badly damaged. Some of the bills had fused together after years underground. Investigators compared the serial numbers. They matched exactly. The cash had come from Cooper's ransom. In total, $5,800 had been recovered. Only a tiny fraction of the original ransom. The remaining of $194,200 has never been found. No one knows how those bills ended up buried along the river, or why only that small amount ever resurfaced. Over the decades, the FBI investigated more than 800 suspects. Some were experienced skydivers. Some had military backgrounds. Others had worked in aviation. A few even looked remarkably similar to the composite sketches. Every time investigators believed they were getting closer, the evidence fell apart. One suspect had the right skills, but the wrong timeline. Another resembled Cooper, but couldn't be linked to the ransom money. Some confessed, only for their stories to collapse under basic scrutiny. The mystery became so famous that people began claiming to be Cooper simply for the attention. No confession has ever been verified. No suspect has ever been charged. And no piece of evidence has ever answered to one question that mattered most. Who boarded Flight 305 under the name Dan Cooper? Even today, experts remain divided. Some believe Cooper never had a chance. He jumped into freezing darkness wearing a business suit with no protective equipment. The weather was terrible. The terrain below was unforgiving. He wasn't wearing a helmet or a jumpsuit. He even chose one of the parachutes that offered less control than the others. To many investigators, the conclusion seemed obvious. He died the moment he left the aircraft. But others disagree. They point to his calm demeanor, his detailed knowledge of the Boeing 727, the specific flight conditions he requested, the decision to demand 4 parachutes, making it less likely authorities would intentionally sabotage the equipment. None of those choices seemed random. They looked carefully planned. If Cooper truly understood aviation, perhaps he understood parachuting as well. And if he survived, he accomplished something almost impossible. He escaped without leaving behind a name, a face, or a trace. For 45 years, the FBI continued receiving tips. Thousands of them. Every new suspect, every anonymous letter, every supposed deathbed confession was examined. None solved the case. Then, in 2016, the FBI made an unexpected announcement. After decades of investigation, the agency officially closed the case. Not because it had been solved, by the way, but because every reasonable lead had been exhausted. The files remained, the evidence remained, the mystery remained. For more than 50 years, people have tried to answer the same question. What really happened to D.B. Cooper? Dozens of theories had been proposed. Some are grounded in evidence. Others rely almost entirely on speculation. The most common theory is that Cooper never survived the jump. Supporters point to the weather, the freezing temperatures, the darkness, the rugged forest below. To them, the jump wasn't an escape. It was a fatal mistake. Others believe the opposite. They argue that Cooper knew far more about aviation than investigators first assumed. The flight path, the aircraft's speed, its altitude, even the unique rear staircase of the Boeing 727. None of those details appear to be random. If the hijacking had been planned that carefully, perhaps the escape had been as well. Another mystery surrounds the ransom money itself. In 1980, only a small portion of the cash was discovered. The remaining money has never resurfaced. It was never deposited, never spent, never recovered. Some believe it was lost forever. Others believe someone knew exactly where it ended up. One detail has fascinated investigators for decades. The hijacker identified himself as Dan Cooper, not D.B. Cooper. The famous name was actually created by a reporting mistake in the days after the hijacking. Yet the error spread so quickly that it became part of the history. Today, the entire world remembers him by a name he never used. And for his true identity, there is no shortage of suspects. Military veterans, commercial pilots, engineers, professional skydivers, even ordinary businessmen. Hundreds of names have been investigated. None have ever been proven. Perhaps the most unsettling theory is also the simplest: that Cooper survived, went home, started over, and spent the rest of his life watching the world search for a man who no longer existed. Somewhere the truth existed. Maybe Dan Cooper died that night, alone in the forest of the Pacific Northwest. Maybe he walked away from the landing zone, hid the money, and lived the rest of his life under a different name. We'll probably never know. The only certainty is that one man boarded a commercial airliner using a name that wasn't his own. He demanded $200,000, jumped into the darkness, and disappeared. More than half a century later, the world still remembers him by a name that almost certainly wasn't real. And that name is D.B. Cooper.